I received the email just as I was completing the pre-flight checks for my Los Angeles to New York run. The subject line was blunt: "We need to talk, and it's not good. 15 years of marriage," summarized by a notification ping from my wife, Sarah. The actual message wasn't much longer. She was filing for divorce. She'd already consulted a lawyer. And, by the way, she'd be moving out of our shared condo while I was on my current trip sequence. Our life, our future, dismantled in under 50 words. I stared at the screen, the cockpit lights reflecting in my eyes, the hum of the auxiliary power unit a dull throb in the background. My co-pilot, a young guy named Kevin, was running through his own checklist. He didn't notice. I closed the email, took a slow breath, and forced my mind back to the task at hand. Pre-flight checklist complete. I announced, my voice even, betraying nothing of the turbulence raging inside me. This was just another emergency procedure, unexpected severe, but manageable. I'm Mark Thompson, a captain with a major airline, 45 years old. My job is to handle pressure, to fly straight and level through any storm. This, I told myself, was just another storm. The flight to JFK was uneventful, 5 hours of autopilot and routine communication with air traffic control. On the outside, I was Captain Thompson, cool, collected, in command. Inside, every memory of Sarah and me was on a horrifyingly vivid loop. Her laughter, the way she used to grip my arm during turbulence, even though she knew I had it under control. The late-night talks about our future, kids we never had, places we'd travel when I finally cut back on flying. It all felt like a film reel detaching from the projector, flapping wildly before going dark. When we landed and the passengers deplaned, I sat in the cockpit for a long moment, the silence of the empty cabin pressing in. I pulled out my phone. Just one word in reply to her email: acknowledged. No questions, no accusations, no begging. Pilots are trained for clarity and conciseness, especially under duress. My training kicked in. My first officer gave me a quizzical look as we walked to the crew bus. "Everything all right, Cap?" he asked. "Just a bit of a headwind on this trip," I replied. He nodded, accepting the familiar pilot euphemism. That was the extent of it. Keep it professional. Keep it contained. The real descent was just beginning. The truth is, part of me wasn't entirely blindsided. The signals had been there for months, maybe a year, like subtle shifts in cabin pressure before the masks deploy. Sarah had become distant, her excuses for late nights more frequent, her interest in my flights, once a source of shared excitement, waning to a polite nod. There were new, expensive clothes, hushed phone calls she'd take in the other room, a sudden keen interest in our finances, an area she'd always found boring. Just planning for our future, she'd said with a brittle smile when I asked about her new financial advisor. A guy named Ethan Vance she'd met through a friend. I'm a pilot, I noticed deviations from the flight plan. But I'm also a husband I wanted to trust. Still, my profession has instilled in me a habit of prudence, of always having a contingency. Years ago, after a particularly volatile period in the airline industry, I'd quietly open a separate bank account, diverting a small portion of my flight pay. Not a secret hoard, but an emergency fund, something an old captain once told me every pilot needs for life's unexpected diversions. I also meticulously digitized and backed up all our important documents, mortgage papers, investment statements, tax returns onto an encrypted hard drive I kept in my flight bag. It was standard procedure for me, like keeping copies of my licenses and medical certificates. I'd even scanned old letters, sentimental things. At the time, I told myself it was for convenience, in case we ever needed them while I was on the road. Now, that digital archive felt less like a convenience and more like an emergency oxygen supply. The last time I saw her, before this trip, her hug felt calibrated. Too brief. No real warmth. "Fly safe," she'd said, her eyes already looking past me. I should have pressed harder then, initiated the difficult conversation. But confrontation wasn't my strong suit outside the cockpit. I always believed problems could be navigated with patience and understanding. I was catastrophically wrong. We met at a mutual friend's party, a rare weekend I wasn't flying. I was a first officer then, full of ambition and stories from a recent international trip. Sarah was in marketing, smart, witty, with a laugh that could fill a room. She said she was intrigued by my world, the discipline, the travel. I was captivated by her stability, her connection to a life on the ground that often felt worlds away from my own. We married within 2 years, a small ceremony with close friends and family. The early years were good. She'd track my flights online, leave welcome home notes. We bought a condo in a decent neighborhood, a place that felt like ours. She understood the demands of my job, or so I thought. The long absences, the missed holidays, the fatigue after a multi-leg international sequence. "It's who you are," she used to say, a hint of pride in her voice. Or was it resignation? My career progressed, I made captain. The money was good, the prestige undeniable. We lived comfortably. But looking back, I see the cracks forming, hairline at first, then spreading. Her father, a very traditional businessman, never quite approved of my gypsy lifestyle, as he once called it. Sarah would defend me, but I often wondered if his words resonated with a part of her that craved a 9-to-5 husband, a predictable schedule. The fissures really started to widen about 3 years ago. Sarah lost her marketing job during a company restructuring. She tried freelancing, but her heart wasn't in it. She talked more about friends whose husbands were present, who had normal lives. My attempts to discuss a timeline for me taking fewer hours, perhaps transitioning to a training role, were met with vague deferrals. "We'll talk about it later," she'd say. Then came Ethan Vance, her new financial advisor. Suddenly, she was asking very specific questions about my pension, our joint investments, the equity in our condo. She claimed Ethan was helping her understand our assets better, to plan for a more secure future. I met him once at a dinner Sarah insisted on. He was smooth, a little too polished, with answers that were expansive but lacked real substance. He talked about maximizing returns and aggressive growth strategies. My internal checklist registered a caution flag. Pilots are wary of anyone promising a flight path that's too good to be true. I suggested we stick with our long-term, conservative financial planner. Sarah accused me of not trusting her judgment, of being stuck in my ways. The arguments became more frequent, our conversations transactional, like communication between a pilot and a distant, unresponsive control tower. The intimacy we once shared had evaporated like morning fog. My layover in New York was a blur of hotel coffee and sleeplessness. The acknowledged reply felt insufficient, cowardly even, but it bought me time. I needed information. My mind, trained for systematic problem solving, began to run its own internal checklists. The first step, secure my own assets. I logged into my personal bank account. The emergency fund was still intact. Small comfort. Then, I accessed the shared cloud drive where we kept copies of all our financial documents. This was a habit born from my profession. Being away frequently, I needed remote access to household information. Sarah knew about it but rarely used it, always preferring paper. I started opening files, bank statements, credit card bills, mortgage documents. An hour into this grim archaeology, I found it. A recent credit card statement for a card I didn't recognize, linked to our joint account but with statements being mailed to a P.O. box. The charges were significant: expensive dinners, designer clothing stores, several large payments to a Vance Wealth Management, Ethan's company. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, cut through my fatigue. This wasn't just a marriage ending, this felt like a carefully planned extraction. My profession taught me to analyze data, to find the anomaly that signals a larger problem. The anomaly was Ethan Vance. The problem was potentially fraud. The emotional pain of the betrayal was still raw, a gaping wound, but now a cold, hard anger began to crystallize around it. This wasn't just about a broken heart, it was about a calculated deception. The next morning, before my return flight to Lax, I called Ben Carter, an old friend and fellow captain. Ben was a grounded, no-nonsense guy who'd seen his share of turbulence, both in the air and on the ground. I laid out the situation, sticking to the facts: the email, the suspicious financial activity. "Damn, Mark, I'm sorry," he said, his voice genuinely empathetic. "What are you going to do?" "I need a lawyer," I said. "Not just any lawyer. Someone sharp, someone who can handle this discreetly and quickly." "David Chen," Ben said without hesitation. "Remember him from college. He's a litigator now, corporate stuff mostly, but he's incredibly smart and tenacious, and he owes you one for that time you covered his impossible trip swap." I did remember David. Smart, focused, relentless. Exactly what I needed. "Thanks, Ben. That helps. More than you know." Hanging up, I felt a sliver of control returning. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was formulating a flight plan. Back in LA, still in uniform, I drove straight from the airport to a pay-as-you-go phone store and bought a burner phone. Then I called David Chen. His reaction wasn't emotional, it was professional, direct. "Meet me at my office tomorrow morning, Mark. Bring everything you have." And I mean everything. At David's office, a sleek, minimalist space downtown, I laid out the printed copies of the emails, the credit card statements, the Vance Wealth Management invoices from the cloud drive. David listened intently, his gaze sharp, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, he leaned back. "Okay, this Ethan Vance, he's not just a home wrecker. This pattern of charges, the P.O. box, it stinks of a financial bleed out. Sarah might be a willing participant, or she might be a pawn. Right now, it doesn't matter. We need to protect your assets immediately." David's methodical approach was reassuring. He explained the legal steps: file a response to the divorce petition, issue freezes on joint accounts, and most importantly, conduct a thorough forensic accounting of everything. Your pilot's habit of meticulous record keeping and digitizing everything, that's gold, Mark. Most people in your situation are scrambling for paperwork. Over the next few days, with David guiding me, we pieced more of it together. It turned out Sarah, with Ethan's guidance, had not only been siphoning money from joint accounts, but had also taken out a home equity line of credit on our condo, a condo that was primarily in my name, purchased before our marriage, though she was added to the title later. The signature on the loan document, which David's team quickly obtained from the bank, looked like mine. But it wasn't. It was a damn good forgery, but under a magnifying glass. The pressure points, the slight hesitation in the strokes, they weren't mine. My pilot's eye for detail, honed by years of scrutinizing complex instrument panels and weather charts, recognized the subtle deviations. This was a premeditated, systematic plundering. The emotional betrayal by Sarah was devastating, but the calculated nature of the financial fraud, the active involvement of this Ethan character, lit a cold fire in me. The shock was morphing into a focused resolve. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a recovery mission. The discovery of the forged signature was a turning point. It shifted the narrative from a messy divorce to potential criminal activity. My grief and sense of betrayal were still there, a constant ache, but they were now overlaid with a pilot's focused determination. When you're flying through a storm, you don't have time for fear. You fly the plane, you follow procedures, you get to the other side. Sarah was no longer just my estranged wife. She was a co-conspirator or a dangerously naive accomplice in a scheme orchestrated by Ethan Vance. David advised caution. Confronting them now could make them scatter, destroy evidence, he warned. We need to build an undeniable case. So, I transitioned from victim to observer, almost like monitoring a developing weather system on radar. I started meticulously tracking everything. My pilot training emphasized data collection and analysis. I reviewed old emails, calendar entries, anything on that shared drive Sarah might have forgotten. I found appointment reminders with Ethan Vance, notes about investment strategies. That sounded more like asset stripping. It became clear Ethan had been grooming her for months, playing on her insecurities, her desire for a more exciting life, promising financial independence. He was the vortex. Sarah was caught in his destructive pull. My strategy, guided by David, was not to attack head-on, but to anticipate their next move and be ready. It was like planning for wind shear. You don't fight it. You adjust power and pitch, and you navigate through it. The opportunity to solidify our case came sooner than expected. The bank where the fraudulent home equity line of credit was taken out contacted me. They contacted the condo's primary owner of record, which was still me despite Sarah being on the title, about a missed payment. This was odd, as I knew Sarah and Ethan had accessed a significant chunk of that line of credit. Why would they miss a payment unless they were trying to draw down even more or were already moving on? David saw an opening. They might be getting sloppy or greedy, he theorized. Let's create a situation where they have to interact with the bank again, under our observation. The plan was simple, legal, and leveraged their probable desperation or arrogance. David, acting on my behalf, formally contested the existing halak due to suspected forgery and unauthorized access, but also, and this was the clever part, offered to discuss a potential settlement, to resolve the disputed debt quickly, to avoid lengthy legal battles. He sent a carefully worded letter to Sarah's lawyer, implying that if certain administrative errors on the loan documentation were rectified, subtly hinting they might need to provide new, cleaner paperwork, a swift resolution might be possible. We were banking on Ethan's overconfidence or Sarah's panic. We theorized they'd see it as a chance to legitimize the existing draw or even attempt to secure more funds before the whole thing blew up. We alerted the bank's fraud department, who were now very interested, and they agreed to monitor any attempts by Sarah or anyone on her behalf to access or modify the loan. It wasn't a trap in the dramatic sense, it was an opportunity for them to repeat their fraudulent behavior. This time under a microscope. We were setting up the equivalent of a flight data recorder, ready to capture every input. The bait worked. A week later, David got a call from the bank's fraud investigator. Sarah, accompanied by Ethan Vance, had visited the bank. Apparently, they attempted to clarify the loan situation and in the process submitted new documentation which included another attempt to replicate my signature on a consent form, supposedly to authorize past and future disbursements. Ethan, with his characteristic smoothness, had tried to strong-arm the bank manager, claiming I was being vindictive due to the divorce. But this time, the bank was prepared. The meeting was recorded, the documents immediately flagged and preserved as evidence. The bank investigator confirmed the signatures were clearly forgeries when compared against my verified signature samples on file and those David provided from my pilot licenses and passport. They had walked right into it, their arrogance their undoing. David called me with the news. We got them, Mark. Multiple counts of forgery, attempted bank fraud. This goes beyond a messy divorce. This is criminal. There was no elation on my end, just a grim satisfaction, like successfully navigating a critical system failure. The evidence was now irrefutable, captured not through elaborate stings but by allowing their own greed and dishonesty to expose them. The flight data recorder had all the information we needed for the investigation. With the bank's internal investigation confirming the forgeries and attempted fraud, David immediately filed a comprehensive report with the local police department's economic crimes unit and also alerted the state banking authorities. He presented them with the timeline, the cloud drive documents, the forged Hilo papers, and the bank's evidence from Sarah and Ethan's recent visit. The wheels of justice, often slow, started to grind. A detective was assigned to the case. It turned out Ethan Vance wasn't unknown to them. He had a couple of similar complaints on file from other messy divorces, but never enough concrete evidence for charges to stick. My case, with its clear paper trail and the bank's active involvement, was different. Within days, the detective, a seasoned officer named Miller, contacted Sarah and Ethan for interviews. I wasn't privy to those conversations, but David heard through the grapevine that Sarah had been visibly shaken, while Ethan had tried his usual bluster, which Detective Miller, a man not easily blustered, saw right through. The Hellock account was frozen. Any funds Ethan had tried to move were now locked down. I imagined Sarah's panic, Ethan's rage. It brought me no joy, just a sense of a necessary, painful procedure being completed. The feeling was akin to an emergency descent, unpleasant, jarring, but vital for survival. My focus was on reaching stable air. The official investigation moved faster than I anticipated. The evidence from the bank was damning. Detective Miller also found that Ethan Vance had a history of charming and then defrauding women, often those going through emotionally vulnerable periods like divorce or a spouse's long absence. He was a predator, and Sarah had been his latest target, or perhaps a more willing accomplice than I initially wanted to believe. The Vance Wealth Management was little more than a shell company he used to funnel money. Many of the investments he'd pushed Sarah towards were either bogus or designed to line his pockets. The extent of the deception was far greater than just our condo's equity line. He had systematically isolated Sarah, convincing her I was hiding assets, that he was her only way to financial security. She had, it seemed, swallowed it hook, line, and sinker, blinded by promises of a lifestyle I couldn't or wouldn't provide in the way he described. The truth, when it was laid out in a stark report from Detective Miller that David shared with me, was ugly and complex. Sarah was both a victim of Ethan's manipulation and a perpetrator of fraud against me. My feelings were a tangled mess of residual anger, pity, and a profound sadness for the woman I had once loved and the life we had thrown away. The legal hammer came down hard on Ethan Vance. Faced with undeniable evidence of forgery, bank fraud, and a pattern of predatory behavior that Miller's investigation further uncovered, he was arrested. His legal options were limited. He eventually pleaded guilty to several charges to avoid a longer sentence, though it was still substantial. Sarah, in a desperate attempt to avoid criminal charges herself, cooperated fully with the prosecution against Ethan. She admitted to her role, claiming she was manipulated and deeply regretful. Given her cooperation and her apparent victimization by Ethan, the DA agreed to a pre-trial diversion program for her, contingent on full restitution of her share of the fraudulently obtained funds and a formal, court-recorded apology for the forgery and deception. The divorce proceeded alongside this. With the fraud exposed, the terms were straightforward. I retained full ownership of the condo. Sarah waived any claim to my pension or other assets. She was left with her share of the debt from the HELOC, which the diversion program mandated she repay. The final divorce decree arrived not by email, but by certified mail from David's office. It was a single, unemotional document, the official end. There was no triumph, only a quiet sense of closure, like signing off on a flight log after a particularly harrowing journey. The storm had passed, but the landscape was irrevocably changed. A year later, I was still flying, but things were different. I sold the condo. Too many ghosts, too many bad memories echoed in those rooms. I bought a smaller place, closer to the airport, simpler. The experience had forced a recalibration of my life. I found I was more cautious, perhaps a little more cynical, but also more appreciative of the straightforward, honest relationships in my life, like my friendship with Ben and my professional rapport with my crews. One day I received a call from Detective Miller. "Thought you'd like to know, Mr. Thompson. Because of your case and the evidence you helped secure against Vance, 2 other women he was grooming have come forward. We were able to intervene before they lost significant assets. Your meticulousness, that pilot's attention to detail you have, it didn't just save you. It helped others." That piece of news resonated deeply. My counterattack hadn't just been about self-preservation or revenge, it had unintentionally served a greater good. It wasn't the flight plan I would have chosen, but the destination had a sliver of unforeseen positive outcome. I still looked at my pre-flight checklists with the same diligence, but now, I also applied that level of scrutiny and preparedness to my life on the ground. The turbulence had taught me that even in the clearest skies, you always had to be prepared for the unexpected, and that sometimes, the co-pilot you trusted most could be the one to lead you into the storm. But it also taught me that I could navigate through it, and out the other side, changed, yes, but ultimately, still flying.